Welcome to Adventuring for Knowledge.
A place where we expand our knowledge about life in general through adventure and long-form conversations.
Tune in, relax, and let learning begin.
Welcome everyone to the Adventuring for Knowledge podcast. We have been out of the game for a while, but we're coming back strong with a couple of episodes. This is the first one of a series. We had a beautiful conversation with Dr. Jillian Roberts, and she's an amazing woman, and we managed to sneak into her busy work schedule. So we do dive right into in this episode. I hope you enjoy it and let the learning begin.
Yeah. And I've been at UVic since 1999. While at UVic, I'm considered a research professor, so I engage in research as well as teach. So I do a combination of both. While at UVic, between 2007 and 2012, I was Associate Dean of the Faculty of Education. Mm-hmm. So that was an experience that in many ways shaped my thinking and how I proceed with my career. So that's one portion. Another portion of my life is that I write books. So I write children's books and I write parenting books. And so the personal compass was first a parental compass. So I created a navigational tool for parents to help them make the best possible decisions to amplify the development of their children. Yeah. And so that was so successful that as a tool, like to think of it as a compass and to have something easy to recall and remember to help you make good decisions on the fly, like parents have to do. So not being rule-based, but rather be values that we strive towards. And that was the inspiration for the personal compass.
Yeah.
So another phase of my life is I'm a psychologist in clinical practice, and you're in my clinical office. And I also have an office at the university and Family Sparks. But this is my clinical office where I see children and teens for a variety of challenges, often developmental challenges. So I do a great deal of assessment. So identifying like dyslexia and ADHD and different challenges in children. So that's predominantly what I do here, and we have a large team of practitioners as well. And then finally, where I was able to connect with you is as the CEO of Family Sparks. So Family Sparks is a mental health startup that is providing a variety of online support, courses, and information for people, but also provides in-person therapy for employees that are in need of counseling or if their family is in need of counseling.
So you kind of took your approach towards psychology to a business perspective.
Right. And partly where that came from is I believe we're in a mental health crisis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that the public sector was moving too slowly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that introduction, talking about the different facets of your life, which is definitely very interesting to hear about all the things you've been able to do. And I think that was a perfect segue to, I wanted to touch on the first point, which is talking about your background and your education, because you're an alumni from several different institutions and, Dalhousie and Waterloo and University of Calgary, University of Toronto, and then Harvard. And can you tell us about your journey in academia and how you got to this point?
So I grew up on Vancouver Island. I graduated from Nanaimo District Secondary School, which was a rough school. It wasn't a fancy or well-resourced school.
So you saw at firsthand the issues of mental health and.
I was a bit of an academic nerd in a school where a lot of the boys, went off to become loggers or, worked in the mill. There's a big Harmac mill up there. So, being motivated academically was not cool when I was growing up.
Well,
so,
of course, yeah.
you know, so that I think in many ways guided my thinking and what I wanted to do in my life in terms of supporting kids and teens. So initially I came to Victoria and I did 3 terms at the University of Victoria, and then I transferred to the University of Waterloo, where I completed a Bachelor of Arts in 1991. And that was in humanities, so I think my official major was history, but I took tons and tons of classes in French as well, because at that point, I was thinking I would become a teacher.
Yeah.
So you had that ambition going into psychology at the point?
No,
or?
not at all.
No.
I hadn't actually
Interesting.
met a psychologist at that point. I didn't even know of, I think I met a professor who taught Psych 100, but I didn't know what being a psychologist meant.
Yeah.
So I went, so I graduated from Waterloo, and that was wonderful. And then I went to Dalhousie to study French methodology to become a French teacher. And my secondary area was social studies. So my thought was that I would go and do that. I was able, as an elective, to take a course in special ed, and I was also able to take a course in educational psychology. So that, I think, was probably like legitimately my first kind of taste of what psychology meant.
It really is, yeah.
What was exciting for me was there was nobody being hired at that time, but I had sent a letter to my local school board in Ontario because I was married by that time and my husband had settled in a town. I went off to Dalhousie by myself. So I sent a letter to our local school board and they invited me for an interview, and I came and they hired me on the spot, basically. And so I went back to Dalhousie in January with a job.
And this is as a teacher?
As a teacher. And so when I ended up finishing that year and coming back to Ontario, I was placed in an elementary school, but the French position was only half-time. They didn't have a full-time French position.
Was this back in Waterloo or somewhere
it was
else?
in that we were living actually at that time on Camp Borden, which was a military base a couple of hours from Kitchener-Waterloo, a couple of hours from Toronto. And so I was teaching, and so I had to take another teaching position to be able to make up a full-time job, which is what my contract that I signed said I was allowed to have, was a full-time job. So they had to find me another half. So my other half started as a kindergarten teacher.
Wow.
So like I taught like kind of like in the morning and then in the afternoon taught French. And in my class was a little girl with a vision impairment. And so I was working very closely with the special ed teacher, and I ended up deciding to take a class in special ed at York University so that I could qualify myself to be a special ed teacher. And so I was there a total of 4 years. For the final 2 years, I was both a French teacher and a special ed teacher. So when I was teaching special ed, you're dealing with children that have a variety of developmental challenges. And I had many, many interactions with the psychologist that supported the school. And at one point I said to him, I've always been curious about psychology. I don't know much about it. And back in the day, there was no internet back then, right? So he actually, through interoffice mail, sent me a calendar for the University of Toronto for their psychology program. So I applied and was accepted and ended up doing my master's in psychology in the summers.
And that's how it all began?
That's where it began.
Started.
Yeah,
No way.
that's where it began. So when I was at the University of Toronto, I just fell in love with both counseling, which is what I was predominantly studying there, and child psychology. And my husband, who was in the military at the time, was going to be transitioning out of the military. So we both decided to go back to graduate school, and I went to the University of Calgary and did a PhD in
psychology,
school
right?
psychology, so child psychology.
Yeah. My wife is gonna love this. She's a child educator at UVic.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah, it's
It's a field that I feel very passionate about because I see it firsthand what needs to be done and what the problems and the difficulties of childhood education and how it all begins from there.
No, the relevance of it, which is what I've come to learn through Manuel's wife and Manuel himself, is that shapes the future, and that shapes how people think, how people react, how people behave in the future, and how they handle, adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of that idea of promoting resilience. So I started it in 1999, and I was tenured in there. And then in 2006, I was asked to let my name stand to become Associate Dean of the Faculty of Education, which is a very large faculty. It's a very large student body, a very large faculty. And
one of the largest, isn't it?
I think it might even be the largest, but if not it's a runner-up. Because I had no background at all in administration, like nothing.
Oh, yeah, I bet it was tricky.
So how is that role different from, would you explain how the role of Associate Dean differs from being a professor?
Well, I didn't do any more research. I think I only taught one class, a term. It was, the focus was on creating policy and administrating, ensuring that the faculty from an administrative perspective ran smoothly. So things like student appeals, and I took a lead on developing the strategic plan for the faculty. I also, when I was there, launched the Center for Outreach Education, which is core at the university. I chaired the steering committee that got that going. So I was involved in kind of thinking about helping in a broader way. So, like, for example, establishing CORE, which is an educational outreach program. I could understand scale in a bit of a different way. So here in my clinical practice, I'm helping one-on-one, but at CORE, I was a part of a team that created a program that could help multiple children at once, right? So that's a different kind of social impact scale.
Yeah, definitely.
And I became interested in that. But what also happened when I was Associate Dean was, because I had no experience in administration, the university offered to send me to Harvard. And it was not a degree program, it was a certificate program. It was just one summer. And it was taught by both professors from the Kennedy School of Business, as well as the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. And that's where I began to think about business.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Is that intersection of education and business?
Business, yeah. So the program, I did the management development program. It was designed to bring new administrators in a university setting. So like new deans and new associate deans and new directors. The goal was to get them up to speed on principles of business, so basically accounting through to marketing, through to
strategic planning,
how to strategically make decisions, so you're making the correct decision, to even fundraising. So it was it opened my eyes to the possibility that business could bring. So when I completed my term as Associate Dean, I had a maternity leave for a year, and then I also had a sabbatical. And generally, when you do a sabbatical, you write a book or something. But I had proposed that I create an app, which was approved. So I created this little app about where babies come from. And the reason why I did that was because I've been working with children through the onset of the technology age. So through the onset of Wi-Fi being in the kitchen to in everybody's pocket with Wi-Fi everywhere. And I was concerned in my own clinical practice with how many children were stumbling onto pornographic sites and how that was affecting them psychologically, like a 7-8-year-old. It was worrisome to me. And so one of the things in this ties into the first point on the compass. I began to realize that we needed to tackle things quickly and early on, and start early, that we don't want to let anything fester. We want parents to talk to children about important things earlier than they ever did. People need to take action to improve their life as quickly as they can. As soon as they realize there's a problem, they need to deal with it.
So you're targeting here the younger population, and you're basically teaching the parents how to approach the children.
Yeah, how to ensure that the parent positions themselves as the go-to person in the child's life, so that the parent and the child's bond is as strong as possible, and that there's no topic like sexuality that would be a taboo conversation to have. That there's just like an absolutely open line of communication between parent and child, which is awkward often for parents.
100%. And
essential for children, right? Essential for children,
It's the foundation of a lot of things that happen in the future.
And I think the interference of just technology alone in the relationship of parents and children plays a big role. Like children are nowadays, they're focused on technology even more than having a conversation with their parents.
Right.
And how do you break that barrier? How do you...
Well, that becomes nurture relationships, which was another point on the compass. So yes, it can be very difficult, and it can be very difficult for parents because they often didn't live through anything like this.
Yeah, it's new.
Have no training or no awareness.
I mean, for younger parents, like if you become a parent in short order,
Hopefully.
you would be more experienced in technology.
Yes,
but 5-10 years ago, there was no parent that grew up in the technology age, right? Very few, unless you're teen pregnancy or something. There'd be no parent really that had to live through social media, bullying, and balancing online, offline activities, and all of that just didn't exist. So I began to realize that I needed to create resources for parents to help them. And so my books, so then the little app that I had developed did extremely well. It downloaded 30,000 times in 6 weeks, and it was a paid app. So and then again, that opened my eyes
to more business,
to the possibility of business, right? That what can I do with that resource? Like this was a resource now that I didn't have before. How can I use this resource to be of help and to people in a bigger way? And so that was basically the foundation of Family Sparks. But it also did a second thing. It led to a book contract. And so my first little book's up there. I wrote a book about the app, which is Where Do Babies Come From? I not up there, but also in that, I just don't have it up on that shelf, is a book about death, helping children to understand death.
That's a big subject right there.
And like terrorism and children. And then I also, that first series morphed into a second series, which then, and all of those books kind of aged up a bit. So my death book became about a talk about terror and tragedy, so that children, and it's been, semi-quiet the last couple of weeks, but there was a period in time where there was the Paris attack and school shootings in the States, and whenever you would turn on the television, there would be some...
Or New Zealand a couple months
exactly.
ago.
And just heartbreaking. And how do you help little ones wrap their mind around that? So for me, that is a kind of a new element of the age that we live in. And, stumbling onto pornography was another thing that this new age brought us. And then I also was very concerned about extremism and hate literature. So I wrote a book about non-discrimination. So what makes us unique, or first talk about diversity. And then the follow-up book to that is on prejudice.
And what is the target age that you want
So those books were for preschool and primary, so 3 to 6. And then the next books are from 6 to 10.
And they're just educational books on subjects that have never been taught.
Well, subjects that haven't been tackled in this day and age.
Yes.
There's lots of books about where babies come from, but they were kind of targeted for a 9-year-old. So they would talk about puberty and that kind of thing. But, really parents need to open up that conversation with a young child, right? So you have to be very gentle. So the series is called Just Enough. we needed to create a book that would be easy for a teacher to be able to read to a whole class and not be embarrassed.
I love this. This is awesome.
That was going to be my question. What the approach was with these books, to have the parents and their children reading it together,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
independently, or at school.
Well, children wouldn't typically be reading on their own at that age.
Yeah, interesting.
But maybe some would, but typically not. So typically it would be a teacher, a grandparent, a parent reading it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have
Yeah.
a question, kind of off topic, but
Sure.
it's related to childhood education. What are your thoughts on the environment that the children are exposed to in daycares? Like when they are dropped off in daycares and the environment has toys, or a lot of childhood centers have that very separated stigma of like, these are the dolls, these are the or even like technology toys in childcare centers nowadays with pads, iPads and televisions. Or do you think exploding the senses of the 5 senses without using any tools would be more beneficial, and just having books of this kind to explain more of?
Yeah, I do not like a lot of technology in the very young. There are times, though, when I think it's important. So, for example, if a child is required to go on a long airplane ride, or they're required to go on a long car ride, I think it can be very stressful for that child just to try to be patient, to sit still.
Okay, yeah, I see.
Right. So I think there are times when
I have been exposed to that, yeah.
yeah, where we do need good quality technology. So I like the Tokaboka apps, for example.
Tokaboka.
Okay, yeah, and they're yeah, I've even reached out to the founder of that. He's done a beautiful job with them.
Is it Japanese?
Tokaboka, like touch your mouth.
Tokaboka. Oh, in Spanish.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Tokaboka.
Yeah, and so it's a Scandinavian developer. I just thought they were brilliant. I loved them, and they were kind of the inspiration for my little app. I mean, my little app was nothing like theirs in terms of the quality, but it was really, really interesting. So I do think there's a role for technology for children, but I don't think. I think that I worry that it is becoming a bit of a babysitter. So
okay.
It's replacing interactions, or it's replacing
Right.
the
This
way-
happens to my uncle all the time. Oh yeah, I need to go here. Here's the iPad. Go.
right.
Yeah.
It's so that's a worry for me. When it comes to early childhood models, I really like Reggio Emilia, which is a model that came out of northern Italy, and it was very much an art and exploratory based program.
Nature-based program.
Yeah, but they had some requirements, so they only wanted children to play with natural, like only wooden toys, not plastic toys, like that kind of thing. I think they do a beautiful job. My daughters went to an early childhood education program at St. Margaret's School that was inspired by Reggio Emilia. And then the other one that I quite like is Maria Montessori. Like her teachings are incredible and incredibly enriching for children. And she initially created her program for children with disabilities. So she worked in a hospital called the Casa dei Bambini Infantili, which was a hospital for children with challenges. And so she was interested in how do you amplify development in a child with, let's say, an intellectual disability? How can we help them become the best that they can be? And then we realized that those strategies were excellent for all children, not just children with disabilities. So I've put my son into a Montessori program. But other than that, I love nature-based. I love play-based programs, where you just allow kids to have, a little bit of unstructured time. But I also believe that having a strong art and music program with little ones is incredibly important for all sorts of developmental reasons. I think it's important for them.
And do you think introducing new books into this early childhood education will be beneficial?
Yeah, I do, and my books are in a lot of schools. My other series, so the Canadian Foundation for the Arts has the Canadian Children's Book List, and the books have been listed on that list a number of times. So those are the suggested readings that librarians and school acquisition people buying books for schools. That's what they look at. So yes. And then my last, I wrote a book with Jamie Cassip, who is the chief educational evangelist for Google in the States. He and I wrote a book together. And it's called On Our Street, which is a book about helping children develop empathy for people living on the street.
Oh, that's another subject that
so character development, kind of, and that book has been included in the recommended social studies curriculum.
Oh,
so
wow.
And what inspired that book? Is it have research discovered that there's a lack of empathy in?
Well, empathy, developing empathy is part of nurturing relationships, which is a point on the compass. I think that making sure that children, so it is incredibly important. Jamie Cassip is very well known for a quote that is, don't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. Ask them what problem they want to solve. Oh. So he's famous for that quote, and I was inspired by that quote, but I wanted to add a little to the quote. And for me, the part that I wanted to add to it was to be a compassionate problem solver, right? Because I think we can, I'm very much for that concept of a triple bottom line. Like, can you create a B Corp, or can you create a company that is not only sustainable financially,
think about the big picture,
but actually makes a difference and actually helps the world. That's if a company can do that, then that's fantastic.
Without putting greed in the way. And
right. So Google, I think, in many ways, through like Google Apps for education and all of what Google was trying to do was a beautiful blend of, for me, was business and social impact. So I reached out to Jamie, and we connected, and we thought this program up, and this project up, and I went back to my publishing house, who was asking me to come up with another idea, and I pitched them the idea, and they said yes, and off we went. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Fantastic. Yeah. That is.
So we were at the point here of your books. You got your app, your books, and how it all began with
Family Sparks. So the books, like the first book was launched in October. It had a print run of 5,000. It was completely sold out by January.
Wow. Are we talking 2015?
2015.
The second book, which was on death, almost sold out on the day it was launched. It pre-sold something like 3,800 copies, was pre-ordered. And then the remaining copies went very quickly, and it also in very short order was reprinted. So I had, within a 6-month period of time, 2 books launch, sold out and reprinted.
Is this within a Canadian market or North American?
It's actually, the distribution is worldwide. So I do interviews with journalists all over the world, because they see the books all over the place. But it's basically a North American market. So I knew,
you saw the need,
right? I saw the need. I knew that there was a problem to be solved. I realized that there was a hunger for this kind of information. And I was also, I think, guided by some of the principles that I learned at Harvard in terms of market assessment.
Yes, definitely.
If there's a need, how do you market to that need?
Yeah, I was inspired. I mean, it wasn't like a full MBA. It wasn't even an MBA. It was more like an MPA, if you will. But it wasn't. I mean, it was a summer, right? It wasn't extensive.
Very useful. I mean, it sounds like it played a big impact in your life.
Yeah, it did. It made me switch how I was thinking, right, from public sector to private sector. Like, it really encouraged me to think beyond advocating with the government, and maybe the business community.
Take an action by yourself.
Would be interested in this, because things were selling so well. Maybe it would be interesting. So I connected initially with RPKM, so Research Partnerships and Knowledge Mobilization at UVEC, so Brent Sternig and Jerome, right there. I think that's the Coast Capital Center for Innovation now.
Jerome, yes.
Yeah, and he was amazing. They were amazing. So we spent some time, considering another app and furthering this idea. That led to a meeting with Owen Matthews, who is the head of course of Alacrity, and a part of Wesley Clover, so a venture capital firm, and a big philanthropist and business advisor and businessman here in Victoria. And that led to a connection with Duncan McRae of Watershed Partners. That led to a connection with Razul Rayani.
It's all about networking.
Yeah,
and your connections going. I see a whole tree happening.
Yeah, and I was brand new to this scene, right? Nobody really knew me, and that then led to a connection with Aaron Skillen and Hannes Bloom, who was the former CEO of A Books, who navigated the acquisition to Amazon.
Yeah.
So these people organized a seed round, which was immediately full. Like the seed round went very fast, and that allowed us to bring aboard some other important people like Andrew Wilkinson and Scott Lake, so the founder of Shopify and the founder of Metal App here in Victoria, as well as others. So that then led to a round A, which was almost entirely bought up by one person. So that was interesting. That one person wanted the biggest piece of the pie that they could get at the time. And so there's been just incredible support from Viatech, like the technology community, and this idea of creating, like disrupting mental health from a business perspective through a combination of digital products and in-person therapies, right? Was where, so we didn't know initially what exactly Family Sparks was going to be. We didn't know what would be the best path forward. And we soon realized that companies were hungry to have a better kind of employee assistance program than what they currently had access to. And there wasn't a lot of competition in that market, so it was not a crowded space. So we decided to basically try to maximize all of my skill sets. So not just writing books, but actually knowing how to run a clinical practice, right? Which is, it's not that you just open a door. There's quite a lot into running a successful clinical practice.
The operations of it as
the
well.
Operational side, exactly. And you have to deal with regulations around confidentiality and licensure. And I mean,
it can get very complex very fast.
Yeah, and if you're not in the field, it can be very daunting to someone. So I think it would be hard for a business person to launch an EAP program without a clinician.
That background,
Yeah, to partner with someone. So we ended up realizing that if we're trying to do a B2C, that's like one sale at a time, which also means one person at a time gets help, right?
And it's more costly as well for
us, right?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But if we made a B2B pitch, right? So we were trying to sell monthly stackable subscriptions to companies. That would allow their employees, as part of the employee benefits package, access to incredible support and therapy.
Larger numbers in both ends,
right.
I would say.
Yeah, right. And that because of it being a subscription model was very, very attractive to the investors.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's where we are now. So we have an absolute dream team of founders and advisors. And we're now creating something called a brand ambassador. So people that go out and speak about us to other businesses and help, make sure that they would take a call if we were to call them, right? Because you can't really cold call very easily. You need someone to create an introduction to a CEO for them to, to pay attention to me, right? And so
create their interest, respect it.
Or I think also I think CEOs people are vying for their time an awful lot, and if someone like a Scott Lake, who founded Shopify, if he were to ask someone, please have a meeting with Jillian, the chances are they're going to say yes, right? Now, whether or not anything comes of that meeting is completely up to Family Sparks and the strength of our program, but we would have a door opened, right? So we've been growing exponentially fast.
And what is it specifically?
It's specifically it is an employee assistance program or an employee family assistance program, but it's designed for the 21st century. So the idea is that you can come for therapy in person, but we can also do therapy by distance, and we can provide support by email, text. We're in the process of creating an integrated app, so all Family Sparks employees can pick it up, press a button, speak to a therapist in real time.
Wow.
And this is supported by their company, or like
Paid
it's
for by
funded?
their company
Yeah.
entirely,
Within their benefits.
within their employee
That
benefits.
is a
Yes.
super
It's
interesting
very
program.
interesting.
Super cool program.
Yeah. So most companies already have these in place. Like it's been a standard part of employee benefits for 50 years. But there's a couple of big players in that space. They own the market share right now, and they're not, necessarily technologically savvy. Nor would I say that even the information that they have online is up to date. Even, so the idea was we could do a heck of a lot better.
Yes.
In terms of not only the quality and the access of the support, but by partnering with technology to be able to create a platform, as well as ensuring that we had both digital supports and in-person supports, that we could really disrupt the space. For a company, most companies, they already have a budget line for this. Most companies do. So it's really like the ask is switching from TELUS to Shaw.
Like in the program, yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's, and one of the things that's exciting about Family Sparks is we have no arbitrary caps on how many sessions you can have. So it's kind of like switching from TELUS to Shaw, and Shaw has unlimited minutes,
Yes.
right? It's kind of like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so our hope is that we're going to raise the bar for what mental health service provision looks like in the 21st century. And if we can be successful, not only, will our family of companies benefit, but maybe the other big guys are going to have to change how they do business.
Yeah, definitely.
And
You're
so-
just improving. You're raising the bar
Trying to.
of mental
yeah.
health. And let's. I want to dive deep into what mental health is. How does someone recognize that they have a mental health issue? What are the tools other than this amazing company you've created that
Right.
people can use to deal with their mental health?
Right. Well, let's just start with basics,
Yeah,
right?
let's do it.
Any kind of addiction, alcoholism, missing lots of work, having instability in the workplace. So you go from job to job to job. Having instability in personal relationships, right? So, marriages break up, relationships break up. I think that is, on the outset, that is something that you can really tell. Also, people that engage in any kind of self-harming behavior, and it's frighteningly more common than people understand. I see it, but it's frighteningly more common than people understand. And then I would say whenever life becomes significantly out of balance, right?
Yeah.
So you're online for 12 hours without a break. You never get out of bed. You eat too much or not at all. You're never out with friends. There's no balance in your life.
Yeah.
I think that that's an indication as well. But for children, it would be children not meeting developmental markers, failing to thrive. It could also mean that children are tantruming and having sort of erratic behavior much older than you would expect them to have that kind of behavior. Not wanting to go to school, not having any friends, not invited to any birthday parties. Those would be some, things to look at for parents. For teens, I find drastic changes are concerning when they cut their hair or they dye their hair or they gain a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight. That it's it not necessarily does that mean there's something wrong, but that's something to look at. For adults too, is just like a feeling, I think too, of not knowing what the purpose or the meaning is of life and going through days as though they're gray and blah and there's nothing you look forward to, nothing makes you happy anymore. Or you're just having anxiety and panic attacks because the world is moving too fast and you can't actually consolidate the information that's coming at you.
And that can happen one day, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden the other day you're perfectly fine again, and then
Yeah, everybody has the ability to experience a mental illness. It's not just for a chosen few. Anybody can have it, given enough stress in their life. Anybody could react with a depression or an anxiety or something, or even biologically based challenges like a bipolar or a schizophrenia.
And do you think these behaviors, whether it's in children or teenagers or adults, are triggered within the household, or is it the environment? What is the biggest trigger agent in this?
Well, for children, I would have to say their environment is by far the biggest trigger. I mean, like, you can have children born predisposed to a challenge, but whether or not that challenge becomes a problem is dependent on the stability and the quality of their environment. So if children feel loved and they have a strong attachment to their caregivers, if they're in a high quality educational system, we know that children have a better chance to have a good outcome.
Yeah.
But a child that is in multiple foster homes, that doesn't have access to medical help when they need it, when parents have no money to buy glasses or to take them to a dentist,
Yeah.
or to buy pharmaceuticals for them, right? Those aren't covered by our medical services plan generally. It can be very difficult for children. So I think environment plays a very big role. Yeah.
And let's picture now, you have a mental health issue. What would you recommend the first step will be?
You once you recognize that you have a challenge, or you've come to that insight or that realization that you're struggling with something, seek help immediately. Mm-hmm. Don't think it's going to go away. Don't think that, if you because I think in my field there's this idea that kids grow out of stuff, right? This is something that is kind of common, that if you just let it
people
be,
say it's just it's gonna go away.
It'll resolve on its own, right?
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous to think that way. I just do. I think it's always going to give somebody a better chance of an outcome the earlier you intervene. So early intervention is key in education. Early intervention is key in psychology, and it's key for individual personal growth. Once you realize you need to work on something, then put your weight behind it and make that part better for yourself.
And what if it's not you, if it's someone else that you noticed? How is it tricky approaching that person? Or
well, one of the things that we've tried to do with Family Sparks is anybody in that person's life can come for therapy or receive our support. So if it's a roommate, if it's a grown mother,
it's like a network
if it's a best
grows.
friend, right? If in your life there's someone that you believe is your family, because I think family looks differently now than it did before.
Yeah.
Any of those people can use your benefits plan.
Wow.
That's another distinction.
That's incredible.
That is so amazing.
Next level.
Well, because the goal here is to make a difference.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
That's the goal.
And that's how you make a difference.
So that's how, if you have a friend, if you're listening to this podcast, go to your boss, ask them to explore Family Sparks, because if you had someone in your life that you were concerned about, you could make an appointment for them.
Yeah.
Where they could see someone
fantastic.
and actually get help.
Yes. So you briefly mentioned personal growth when we're talking about how to overcome these difficulties. And just switching topics a little bit, if we can talk about the research you've done, what you have discovered in terms of living a high performance life, and what that takes and what that looks like.
Right. So for me, a high performance life is really one where you don't see your life with limitations, that you realize that your life is going to be a product of what you co-create, right? It's going to become what you make it, right? I've learned that myself. So it's this idea that we want to ensure that people can reach for their dreams along with maintaining solid mental health.
Yeah.
So they don't burn out, so that they still have a solid, social network, support network, right? So it's about kind of being driven, but carefully driven.
Balance.
Especially these days, burnout is becoming, I believe, more and more common, and people don't realize that.
Thoughtfully, which is where, the third part of the compass is maintaining self-care, is really making sure that people prioritize their mental health.
Yes.
They prioritize things that are going to, I often with children use this idea of a bucket. Certain things fill up your bucket and other things drain your bucket. You need to make sure that you're actively doing things that fill your bucket. For some people, that's spending time with friends. For a lot of people, it's going outdoors, spending time outside, and exercise. Right? There's different things that you can do. Like for me, I'm an artist wannabe. I'm not an artist, but I would have loved to have been an artist.
Yeah.
And I get a great deal out of plays, concerts, museums, galleries. They really fill my bucket, seeing what other people create.
So that's how you maintain your self-care.
That's for me.
For you, yeah.
Right.
But again, it's very different for each person.
It's different for each person, and
yeah.
people have to make sure that they spend the time to consider what it is that they need.
Because it's tricky, because I think there's a stigma that the harder you work, the more value you're going to get out of everything. And all of a sudden, you live an unbalanced life, and then it doesn't mean that you are
you're burning out.
You're burning out, and you are not reaching your maximum potential.
Right, and I think along with that is making sure that you're loving yourself the way that you would love other people.
Yes.
That you see your soul and your body as something that is of priority to take care of.
Yeah.
Right, and making sure that people can exercise that kind of self-love can get them through bouts of depression, where depression really is trying to make you hate yourself. That when you are coming from a place where you're prioritizing yourself and your own health and care and love of self, it's going to be a powerful antidote to mental illness.
How do you find time for this? Because I know, like, people, they might one day not want to go to work because they feel like they want to take care of themselves instead of going to work. How do you take an approach in a business perspective? Like, tell your boss, hey, you know what? I really can't do this. But then all of a sudden, you have 7 days that you're not going to work because you feel like you need to take care of yourself. What would be a good approach for that?
Right. I think there's something called a very dear colleague once gave me an article about resilience called Everyday Magic. And it struck me because I think really self-care is not like you get yourself so depleted that you then ask for a day off.
Yeah.
Right. I think what self-care is you take your lunch hours, you take your breaks, you walk to work.
It's preventing that state, right?
Right.
Preventative maintenance.
Right. And so what your boss is going to see is someone trying to live the healthiest lifestyle they possibly can. And then if something happens and you go and you ask your boss for a time off, your boss is going to realize that you're trying. Right.
Yeah,
right.
I
So
agree. Yeah.
it goes. It's about like, especially leading a high performance life. It's about becoming the total package.
The total package.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're taking those preventative steps of taking your lunch hour and maintaining healthy hours at work, it is less likely that you will end up taking large periods of time off because you need to.
Yeah, and research clearly shows this. So, there's been a great deal of research in the area of industrial organizational psychology, which is business psychology, and there's been studies that clearly show, what kind of healthful atmospheres will prevent employee absenteeism. And we also talk about something called presentism, which is that you're there at work, but you're not really there at work.
Yeah.
Because your mind is not there.
Your mind is not there because you're worried or whatever. So it's, helping employees give their best when they're at work, but then also ensuring that their personal life is healthy and balanced.
Now that strikes me to a point where I want to talk about, which is distractions. When you're trying to live a high performance life, there are so many distractions in this world that prevent you from reaching this high performance life. And is there a chance you could define some of these distractions and maybe a tool to swap them away from your life?
Right. So, I think technology is a huge distraction for people. Like, I know people that will, think that they're going to check their email and they're on the internet for 5 hours kind of thing. And I'm very lucky with my co-founders because we have agreed to the use of a group chat, which is done by text, which I have found very helpful because I can communicate with them without going into my email.
Oh.
Because the moment I go into my email, I can't get myself out.
It's not one email, it's two, three, four,
Right.
yeah.
So, like trying to create systems of communication that don't always require email for me, I think is important.
Yeah.
But I'm big on setting to-do lists in a day and putting timers on, like if I want to go on like a Pinterest, that for me is probably my Achilles heel. I love it's so visual and it's so beautiful.
You're an
and
artistic person. You like
I like it very much, but I will be disciplined and I'll say, okay, I'll put it on my phone. I'm going to do this for half an hour.
Put timers, to-do lists, yeah.
Yeah, but I love to-do lists. To-do lists for me is sometimes what I'll do to myself is if I can get through everything on my to-do list, I can binge watch Netflix.
It's an accomplishment.
Right. And then if there's a series on Netflix I want to watch, I can just go crazy. But that's my treat to having gotten things accomplished.
You can even have it scheduled. Well,
Yeah.
today we're gonna watch 3 episodes or
Right.
1 episode.
Right.
And I've heard also through another podcast that people put timers in their phone and reminders of like, take a sip of water.
Yes.
Remember why you're doing this.
Right.
Or remember who you love. And stuff like that.
I think the technology
can be helpful.
In that
way.
Like I've been brainstorming with our founders, and some of our founders are incredible technologists in their own right, like Andrew Wilkinson, for example. But could you create an integrated platform, which we're currently creating, where at the end of a session, a therapist can quickly write into the clinical notes that are online, son's graduation on Friday, right? But could then the system somehow then send from the therapist a text to the patient, I'm thinking of you today, I hope your son has a great time.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Wow, that will provide amazing support. I can already see it.
Right. Yeah. Or remember that we're trying, remember this week you're trying to not drink anything.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Halfway through the week, you've only got 3 more days.
Yeah.
Or do you know what I mean?
Encouraging
Taking that step further
Right.
and helping the
Encouraging
person.
motivation thoughts.
Right, but it's not done by a robot.
No,
right?
it's
Because
personal.
it's personal. So the personal therapist working with that person can feed in what those important reminders are, but then the integrated technology platform has a way of dispersing it so it's not like the therapist doesn't have to remember to do it, because the therapist won't remember to do it, right? So yeah, so that kind of thing. How can we use technology to increase rapport, so that sort of that clinical alliance between the patient and the therapist, and then how can we help people feel engaged to that therapeutic process, so that they don't just like forget to come back or not want to come back because it wasn't helpful. They can actually see the benefit of it.
I can see the benefit of that. And I'm gonna throw a curveball here.
Okay.
Are you ready? Because I have my sister's very interested in this subject, and I do want to hear your opinion on it. What do you think of medicinal drugs or psychedelics being treated in a psychological environment, or very controlled environment? What do you also think of psychedelics or drugs to relieve or to provide that mental health or mental stability if taken in a very controlled environment?
Right. Well, Gabor Mate, who is an amazing physician, thought leader, advocates for the use of ayahuasca, for example, in treating addictions, and he's had some good luck with that. Treating addictions is notoriously incredibly difficult to treat.
Oh, yes.
So I think, we need to think outside the box in terms of how we can provide the best possible care to people. But we need to do so in a way that is not big pharma driven, right? So sometimes the worry that I have with, people floating an idea of LSD or something as an antipsychotic agent, I mean, it would definitely not be an antipsychotic agent. It would be a pro-psychotic agent, but use of that, in therapy in some way. My fear of that is that the financial benefit of that outweighs the therapeutic benefit of that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right.
People will want to make a business out of it.
Right. I worry about that.
Yes.
But that being said, it was incredibly important for people going through chemotherapy to be able to stimulate their appetite with marijuana or to manage their pain with marijuana. So I never had an issue with medical marijuana, not ever. So I think there's a role and there's a place, but I think what we do need is some research around.
Definitely.
Like empirical, like we need to make sure that what we're suggesting is actually proven to be helpful. And then it be, carefully monitored. And that was one of the reasons why I was very in favor of legalizing marijuana, because I didn't want it to be a street drug. I wanted for people to have access to it in a way that was controlled, and you know exactly how many grams are in that edible, it just incredibly safe. If we could take the risk out of using the drug, and we made it safer, I would feel better.
Yeah.
But I have a question now that we're speaking about this topic. Besides marijuana and more back to psychedelics, do you think there's any biological risk from taking these drugs, even within a controlled environment and a controlled dosage?
there's something called drug-induced psychosis, and I've seen it. I've actually witnessed it firsthand. So drug-induced psychosis is that sometimes a brain is fragile, and for whatever reason, and you might not know the brain is fragile, but the brain is fragile, and then someone goes on a psychedelic medication and they never come back.
Oh.
So it's like they're on a trip for the rest of their life.
That's just a biological
It's called
effect.
drug-induced psychosis. It's a thing.
Is there a way to test for that?
No, it's like the biggest risk, I believe, is street drugs where there's stuff mixed in. Like I think.
Yeah. And yet again, here's the part where you don't know what you're taking.
Right.
The risk of that.
Yeah, but there has been. I've never heard of it with ayahuasca, but that might just be that I haven't. Like that could be my own lack of research. But I know that LSD and other street drugs can lead to a drug-induced psychosis. Once, when I was doing my doctoral training, I was doing my internship in an adult facility. Even though I was focusing on children, the province that I licensed in required you to have a variety of different experiences as part of your internship. So I was with an adult in an adult placement. And there was this young man, and I remember him so clearly because he would wear his hospital gown with a leather jacket over top. And he'd be walking around.
Cool.
Yeah. I remember it was like, oh, he's interesting. And I got to test him. And what was interesting for him was that I did a test called the house tree person. And when he was doing the person, normally what happens, a typical way of doing it is that you do the head and then the eyes and the body. But he started with the toe and then went up like this and then down through the arm and then over and the hair. And then it was like just like an unusual way of creating that. And of course he was in a place of psychosis. And I had said to my supervisor, my wonderful doctoral clinical supervisor, Dr. Rudolph Kinsel, I said to him, that was the most unusual way I've ever seen anybody complete that. And he said he has drug-induced psychosis. He had gone to a party where I think they were in a field and they had like a bonfire, and he was, whatever was being used, he was using. And he went off. His friends ended up bringing him to emergency, and then he ended up coming eventually to us, and I was part of the clinical team that was trying to understand. What ended up happening to that fellow was he went to Panoka, which was an institution, a mental institution where people don't generally come out. So yeah, there are risks.
But like you said, there's no way at this point of knowing who is vulnerable or who is
the one.
No,
it's a gamble.
And the drugs out there are so under the table that you don't even know what
it's
you're
hard.
taking.
I remember once a pediatrician told me something that I thought was interesting, and I don't really know how true it is, but I found it an interesting observation. Was that drugs that were from nature, like marijuana, that haven't been cooked or distilled or monkeyed with,
Yeah.
like,
Or tempered with, if you
like chemically altered,
Yeah.
like you would get with, like, Breaking Bad, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you're
yeah.
cooking up,
100%,
you're
yeah.
cooking up
Like,
crap.
picking up
Ayahuasca.
mushrooms from the ground or something
Right.
like
Yeah. Is that there was greater risk on the brain with a cooked substance, monkeyed with chemical
Yes.
substance, than something that was purely, like, even opium.
And
right?
that is 100%
Yeah.
what I believe in, and that I've put my foot behind, is that this earth gives you the tools for humans to live. And I think it is so scary and so unsafe to take something that is not directly supplied by Mother Earth, that
Yeah.
someone
Yeah, like
made it.
genetically modified
Exactly.
wheat.
Anything that someone
yeah.
makes, they could have put in
Yeah.
2 scoops more of this or 2 scoops less
Right.
of this. That completely puts out balance of whatever they're creating.
Like,
And
I've seen so many kids diagnosed with celiac disease or gluten sensitivities, and part of me wonders, is it because that wheat
Oh,
has
they
been
ground out, yeah.
genetically modified?
I agree.
It's monkeyed with.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm gonna say it. That's what I believe, that the most wholesome life you take part of, the more healthier your mind, body, and soul will be, because you are not partaking in anything that anyone else has control. You're partaking on what you have control. If you can produce your own food,
Yeah.
if you can, it gets kind of touchy with medication, and like, if you have pain, can I take a Tylenol or any other pain drugs? I don't really take pills, and I want to hear your opinion on that, on like
Well,
medication
yeah,
overall. Like,
Yeah, well, you're talking to a cancer survivor, so I wouldn't have been able to get through
Oh, yes,
chemotherapy without
definitely.
morphine. So I'm very happy that there's such a thing as morphine. There is a place for Western medicine, for sure. I mean, I'm living because of that.
Yeah.
But when we're trying to, there are things that you have to treat. You would have to treat, for example, a fever in a baby. If you don't give a baby a Tylenol, the baby could develop a febrile seizure. So there are times when you absolutely have to, focus on Western medicine. There's no way of treating meningitis with antibiotics, right?
Yes,
There's things that you
definitely.
have to do. But I think when we're talking about elective, like, it's not, nobody, like, no physician is going to go and tell you to eat processed food, or, do you know what I mean? A physician would only tell you to take a medication that they believed was important for you to take, right? Especially, I would say, especially with modern day physicians. I believe that Western medicine, by and large, especially Canadian medical schools, do an excellent job of training physicians. We just need to make sure that our medical care keeps to date,
can keep up
with what good medicine looked like in the 1960s is different than what good medicine looks like now. So we need to make sure that our medical system keeps pace with the changes of our reality in our world. So if somebody's physician said, I think your child, or I think you need this, I would back that 100%.
yes.
But, for someone trying to live a clean life, I love the idea of growing your own food. I love the idea of buying locally. I think we live in Saanich. We purchased a home out in the farmland of Saanich because I want to go to those farms and buy those produce. That's the food I want on my children's plate. So I think that living healthfully, where you're outside, you're eating important and good and nourishing food, and you're breaking bread with friends as you're cooking wholesome foods together, I think that's the origin of a healthy life.
Yeah.
And I think our role as citizens is just, in this day and era, like you said, it's not the same as in the 60s or the 50s. It's just staying informed and being reasonable consumers, and understanding what's out there and what we should purchase and what we shouldn't be purchasing.
Yeah, like anything that's, like, for me, I don't want anything anything processed.
Me neither.
You know what I mean? Anything monkeyed with.
I'm a plant-based.
The risks, yeah.
I have a plant-based diet, and even the fake meat and all of that, I am so not attracted to that. I think it's even worse. I mean, there's some benefits to that if you're trying to make the transition to a healthier lifestyle. But in my opinion, the more wholesome your life can be, the better.
Well, and I remember my oncologist had said, and I hadn't actually, it's funny, sometimes people say, so much, and then it's like, there's lots I don't know.
Oh, you have to.
There's so much
the more you know, the less.
Yeah, it's like, and I remember sitting with, and I'm even embarrassed to say this out loud, but I was sitting with my oncologist, and he said, I'd like you to follow a Mediterranean diet. And I'm thinking, pasta?
What is this?
Bruschetta? Like, paella? What do you mean, a Mediterranean diet? And so he was explaining, how people in the Mediterranean areas tend to eat, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of fish and
Olives at all? Olive oil?
olive oil and red wine and things like that. And for my particular type of cancer, I had bladder cancer. That it was preventative. It helped keep your body healthy, because your kidney and bladder, right, filter toxins. So it's a very, very good chance that my cancer was started by a toxin. And I think it was hair dye. I used to dye my hair. And so I stopped dyeing my hair. And so I think I should say I used to dye my hair dark brown.
Yeah.
And so I've stopped dyeing my hair dark brown. And so I had for many, many years dyed my hair dark brown. And I believe that it was that toxin sitting on my scalp that my kidney and bladder system had to filter. I believe in my heart that that's where the cancer came from. So yes, I totally, I would someday, I would love to be able to retire and, maybe have a little home in Italy where I have green beans and tomatoes growing on my patio. And I'd love that.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you very much for opening that and sharing that with us. That was a beautiful moment. So thank you.
You're welcome.
For that.
You're welcome.
And now that you've opened now that you've walked us through this experience that you've lived, I'd like to tie it back to the compass that you have developed and talking about how the power of resilience and how that helped you overcome those difficulties. Just for people listening to this podcast that are fighting their own battles, whatever those battles are, how do you manage to control the power of resilience and overcome those difficult situations?
And what is resilience?
Yeah, I have to say, resilience was a concept that rocked my world when I first understood it. I first understood the topic of resilience within a research study completed by a famous psychologist by the name of Dr. Emmy Werner. She did one of the best prospective longitudinal studies, cross-sectional studies, that has ever been done on the island of Kauai. And she was interested in why, and on this island where there was addictions and abuse and lots of criminal activity, how could people be okay? Like initially she was interested in the risk factors, but then she switched it to the protective factors. What could people do in their life to allow them to have the best possible outcome? And it was similar to like the British baby cohort study. Like there's other studies that have done this, but basically the idea is can we predict what supports would be helpful to allow someone to bounce back from a challenge or get around a challenge through the course of development. So you've had your mother die, how do you bounce back? Or you're growing up in poverty, how can you still then have a good outcome, right? And so she identified different things that made a difference for her, and they totally rang true for me. Like I when I was reading her work, I completely believed it. And I could immediately see how it could be helpful for me clinically, because sometimes I'm sitting with a family and it is so complex, and this step parent and that and blah, and one child living there and one child living there, and just incredibly complex situations. And how can I make sure that I'm recommending something that will be helpful? And so I began to use resilience theory. I began to think through the tenets of resilience and what does the child have in place already, and what is the child lacking from that established body of literature And I have to say, the Search Institute in the United States has done a beautiful job of basically reviewing that literature and summarizing it and curating it. And they've come up with the top 40 developmental assets or protective factors per age of child. And I use those extensively. We actually wrote the Search Institute and got permission to use those developmental assets in Kids, Sex, and Screens, which was the book that introduced the parental compass, from which the personal compass was inspired by.
Yeah.
And so what basically the outcome of the study was is everybody has the ability to be resilient. It's not that some people have a resilience gene and some people don't.
Yeah.
Every single human being has the ability to be resilient. And there are things that we can actively do that promote resilience. So children having good access to education, good access to healthcare, making sure that children have unstructured playtime outside with other children, having stability in their home. The British birth cohort study talked about having regular bedtimes, for example. So, and other people have talked about the importance of high warmth, high structure environment. So basically, how we can take that information that research has told us and summarize it so that it's easily accessible for someone that doesn't have a PhD in psychology.
Yes.
Right. So that was the inspiration for the personal compass. So each aspect of the personal compass reflects
On all that research.
an aspect of promotion of resilience. So like those areas are start early, which is all about early intervention and not being in denial.
Yeah, let's talk about just define them all.
Yeah. So starting early was this idea of jumping on a challenge as soon as you can, followed by unconditional love of self. So that was, basically being loving and forgiving of self, not let's say being not if somebody else made a mistake and you would forgive them, but you would basically crucify yourself if you made that same mistake, right?
Yeah.
But I call it the reverse golden rule. Like the golden rule is treat others the way that you would want to be treated. The reverse golden rule is be as kind and gentle with yourself as you are with other people.
Yeah, you have a put your own oxygen mask first.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to take care of yourself. And that flows into self-care, which is about being actively creating a life that has that everyday magic of self-care.
Like you mentioned before.
Yeah. And I've got lots of ideas. Like for parents, an example of that is having bookends of your child's day, making sure that you have a good snuggle with your child in the morning and that you read them a book and give them, that they're the most important thing in your world and that they're going to have beautiful dreams that night, like just creating that anchor for your child. Like there's different ways that we can do that, but maintaining self-care, followed by setting smart boundaries. And for me, that is about, putting that timer on for technology use.
Like we've talked about,
But it is also about making sure you have boundaries in your personal life that, you don't, find yourself being a people pleaser.
Oh, I think
Right.
I struggle there a little.
Yeah. But, this idea that you will be empathetic, but with boundaries, right? That you will do the best possible job you can with boundaries, right? Because otherwise you burn out. Like you just, so for example, at Family Sparks, we have a boundary that we don't text each other after 8 p.m. We can email each other after 8 p.m., but we're not going to text because texting dings, right?
Yeah,
Whereas you'll get your email when you wake up in the morning.
That's something that I've taken from the lunch and learn that we had at Red Break is that it's just trying to leave work behind when you come to the household, to home, and likewise when you come to work, just leaving your personal life behind and just working with those boundaries. And it's very important to set them and to follow them.
I remember this was an anecdote that was told to me at Harvard by a professor from the Kennedy School of Business, and I now understand that it has come from Stephen Covey's work, like the 7 Habits. But the anecdote was you have two loggers logging trees, sawing wood with a saw. One logger saws for 5 hours, let's say, and takes an hour off. And the other sews for, 10 hours and doesn't take any time off. at the end of the 10 hours of each, and remembering the one person took the hour off, who would have cut the most wood? Right? This was the riddle. Mm-hmm. So, most people would say, well, the person who spent the longest, worked the hardest, right, would be the person that would cut the most wood. But the aha was when that person took the hour off, they were sharpening the blade.
Ah.
Right? So that when they went to go cut wood again, it was sharp and they could cut more wood. Whereas this person, the blade got continually dull, and it was less effective over time. They weren't able to cut as much wood. So basically, this was a riddle that was told to us to underscore that importance that we actually become more effective and more efficient and more productive if we do have those breaks.
Yeah, if we put our time and we take a break to think about what you're doing, to set your goals, take a step back, look at the bigger picture, not get those blinders on.
No.
And it's important to acknowledge that, because it's not slacking and it's not being the best that you can. It's just acknowledging that you need to take those breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after that is nurturing relationships, which is this idea that in this fast-paced world of ours where everybody's face is in a phone, how do you still have intimacy? And I would even say, like, pornography. Like, are we going to have a generation of people that think sex is transactional and it's a currency and there's no intimacy, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we need to nurture our relationships, our intimate relationships, our platonic relationships, our familial relationships. I think other cultures do a much better job at that than we do in North America. I think, it was interesting, even this idea, like, I remember I went to an architecture conference, and it was crazy I did. And they talked about how 100 years ago people would have porches on the front of their house, and they would sit after dinner and sit and have a coffee or a tea in front of the house and chit-chat as people were walking up and down the streets. And similarly, when you spend any time in Europe at all, you'll often go to the piazza or the square.
People are having an espresso.
Or an ice cream cone. They're connecting with their neighbors. They're chit-chatting, right? But now, where do people have their patios now? They're at the back of the house.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Right?
That's very... Carry on.
But
where did we turn the corner,
Yeah, and... That really made me think, right? There's and we are human people that are not designed to live on our own.
No,
we are not designed to live on our own.
No. We need that social aspect in our lives. Yeah.
And children need a social aspect. Parents need the support. Older people need support. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to create a world that is supportive of our community, and then that's why Family Sparks, I like the term family, because work is a family.
It is.
Your extended family can get access to this support. It's really about creating that community family.
And this community could be anything that you create. You can be so into chess, you join a chess club, or you can be a farmer and you can join the market, or even going to the market. Monster Market, we have it just around the corner.
Yeah.
Going in there, talking to people.
It's part of the community.
Taking a moment to say hello to the checkout person.
Yeah.
Saying hello to the taxi driver. Taking a moment to stop and say hello to someone on the street. I think it's important.
I think that saying hello, like you just mentioned, I really stick with that, because, and then this will roll into the next one, which is lose stigma and prejudice. Sometimes it's hard to say hello to someone because you feel like they don't want to say hello to you.
I've experienced the opposite, where I do it, but people are so not used to it anymore that they don't know how to respond, and it does get awkward depending on.
It can be awkward. But what I often say to my students is, we've created our current environment. We can deconstruct it and reconstruct something different, right? Yeah. Just because we have found ourselves, where people live in big homes in the urban sprawl, architects now are trying to think of, like, housing where you've got low income with high income, your live and work that, people can walk to work. If you take a look where other fields are moving, there is the ability to create change. And I think that's important. Losing stigma and prejudice was very close to my heart, and also is a line of books that I've written about. And for me, there's just on the surface of it, right? Like, don't be prejudiced, right? Like, just don't, like, and don't adhere to any stigma in the world, like, somebody with piercings is a bad person, or, do you know what I mean? Like, just don't. But then also, don't accept any prejudice that the world might be throwing onto you. So if you, for example, I'm a woman trying to create change, and I'm working with mostly male investors. I think I'm working with only male. No, there's 2 wives of 2 investors that also are investors, but I'm working predominantly with male investors. I have to, and I'm not a business person, like I wasn't trained, I don't have an MBA, I have to check at the door any insecurity that I have about my knowledge of, like having to put up my hand and say, okay, what is a KPI? Like, okay, what does that score mean? Like, I've had to not believe that there's anything lacking in my knowledge set, that I can still be an equal player at that table, even though I don't have an MBA. I mean, that's like one kind of line, but what about a new Canadian coming and feeling insecure with their English? Or what about, what about a child who, I had this girl yesterday, she had the beautiful, beautiful braids in her hair, and she, I think she didn't like that her hair was kinky, so she braided it. You know what I mean? So like, how do we just let go of any box that someone tries to put us in?
Yeah.
And then how can we also not put other people into any kind of a box?
It comes both ways, the way you look at people and the way you think people are looking at you.
Yeah.
And I think that the best way to do it is just to not care.
Yeah, well, just to open up and like,
just to open up,
yeah, and I'm incredibly proud of my country. Like, I believe I live in one of the best countries. If I could choose what country I would live in, and I could, I would choose Canada, like without question. I love our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I love the multicultural nature of Canada. I was watching a video of Jurassic Park the day before the big win, and there were new Canadians, old Canadians, Canadians in wheelchairs. There were, and they're all
celebration, right?
They're all Canadians. Yeah. They're all Canadians, no matter what language they spoke out of the cradle. Yeah. They're all Canadians.
Celebrating a victory, nationwide victory.
That brought us, together. We are a nation of immigrants, and the immigrants make us stronger. I mean, my grandparents were immigrants. Like we are stronger because of our diversity, and in many ways, I think biodiversity, right? Like an ecosystem in nature is stronger
when it's biodiverse.
Yeah, we are stronger when we are diverse as well.
That's nice to hear, because I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born in Canada, so it's
I'm a Mexican too, so it's everywhere,
Colombian here,
yeah. The one of the things that I actively tried to do with my own children is we actively learn other languages. So in our home at any given time, someone is trying to learn English, Spanish, Italian, French, or Swedish.
Wow.
So all of us do Duolingo challenges with each other. I've taken my children on holiday, mostly to conferences is kind of how I do it. Is if I'm invited to a conference, I'll take my children with me, but all around the world.
That's another one that I want to touch on. Traveling exposes you to different cultures, different environments. Yeah,
and I would have to say, to be honest, that my life changed dramatically. I was an exchange student to France when I was a teenager. It wasn't a super long exchange, but it was a meaningful exchange for me. And I think it might have been the first time I'd ever been on an airplane. Yeah. It might have been I think I went to Winnipeg for my sister's graduation, but then it was my second time on an airplane. My first time out of the country. Well, I might have been to, listen to me, I might have been to Seattle. Like I remember driving.
It's just around the corner.
Yeah, but it was but it was my first time out of North America for sure, and I had never gone anywhere interesting in the States. Just driving across Canada, dipping into Montana, that kind of thing. But it really opened my eyes in a significant way, and it made me understand that there was way more to life that was possible than I currently understood.
Yeah, I think sometimes the way I find myself looking at things is there is so much out there in this world. This world, this universe is so big. You are such a small part of this world. Such a small part of this world. So why should we put pain in our bodies about anything?
Well,
you know?
and then also, why do we care less maybe about a child in another country?
Yeah.
Right? That child in that other country should matter to us as much as a child.
It's still a child. It's still.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
like this idea of building walls and like I just think it's terrible.
I agree.
Absolutely terrible.
I agree.
I was thrilled a few years ago. I was able to take my family to Mexico City, and we drove down to Puebla, and we went to the pyramids. We went to the amazing anthropology museum in Mexico City.
It's huge,
Yes.
massive.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
We went to see the Basilica de la Guadalupe, you know, and it was just amazing. But I want my children to have those moments.
Yes, I
You know,
agree. I 100%
yeah.
agree that.
It was March break, actually, and it was spring equinox. And at one of the places where we were, there was a shaman, an ancient Mexican shaman, doing rituals for money. And, you know, we participated in that. You know, not our religion, but it was someone's religion. And let's honor it. We're here. Let's honor this religion, this wisdom. Who's to say? Let's just, so I stood there and I was blowing smoke and, you know, and my girls were taking pictures and, you know, I've been to China. I've been to the Hainan Islands. I've gone to see the massive Buddha on the Lannan Island out of Hong Kong. Like, you know, I'm not Buddha. Well, I'm not Buddhist. I'm Catholic,
But you're open to it.
but I'm open. I'm open. If we all become open and respectful, and you know, just even think of how boring it would be if you only ate meat and potatoes and there's no curry and there's no Mexican food and there's no cilantro
pasta
and there's no garlic. Like, oh my goodness, life would be so boring.
I agree.
You know, it's there's a vibrancy to
It is very
cosmopolitan and a global world, a global economy, a global world.
And even just trying something new, it's so exciting. It gives me the chills to try something new.
Or
all
to
the
eat
time.
something new, to taste something new, to see
Yeah.
something new, to read a
read
new book.
something new,
Yeah, a new idea, you know?
The way of thinking, what people do out there is just
I love it.
fulfilling.
It is very fulfilling.
Yeah. So we're at the tail end here.
Okay,
I do have a couple of questions that we
Sure.
always ask
sure.
all the time. And I really want to know nowadays, what excites you the most? What brings you the chills? What brings you the goosebumps? What do you find yourself?
I'm very, well, I mean, it's situation specific right now, but I'm very excited about scaling Family Sparks. Like, I'm very excited about other companies adopting the program. And then there's also that operational side that we have to keep pace with. You know, we need to continually be hiring therapists and, you know,
Yes.
all of that. But I'm excited about actually making a change and disrupting mental health.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there was a billboard out there everywhere in the world that you had to put a message, what would the message be?
Love each other.
That is so beautiful.
Spread the love, yeah.
Love is the basis of everything. Love is
Yeah.
giving unconditional love is one of the most powerful things I have experienced, and I am trying to practice. Just loving everything, loving everyone, actually physically saying, "Hey man, I love you."
Yeah. It's
And not
not
only to people, but like you said, to
to
yourself.
yourself.
To yourself,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
not a
Yes.
dirty
Like,
word.
You did a good
Yeah.
job, yeah.
You know, it's not a dirty word, and it's not a word to be embarrassed of. And in fact, the more love we have in our world, and which is why I don't understand homophobia. Like, if two
Yeah.
people find love,
So
fantastic.
beautiful. So beautiful
Like,
that someone found
Like,
love.
why would we want to take that away
Yeah,
from
love
them?
is the most beautiful feeling, and it can't do harm. It's just
Like,
it's love.
I don't
Yeah.
like, I don't understand, you know, that. So I think if we create a world where people can explore and loving feelings and share loving feelings, if children grow up in a loving environment, if people work in a loving and supportive environment, creativity and capacity for new ideas and new ways of thinking and risk taking and having a growth mindset and all of that it's very hard to do all of that if you don't feel loved.
Yeah, and even just encouraging word like, you're doing amazing, keep it up.
Yeah.
Those play a big role.
It's that
in
emotional
everything.
support, right?
Yeah.
And taking the time to nurture that relationship.
Yeah, that's the main driver, I think, in everything we do.
I'm grateful that you let me be on your podcast.
No, thank you so
very
much. Do you have any questions for us?
No, I think I'm good. I'm flattered that you wanted to talk to me. Thank you.
Yes, thank
Thank
you
you
so
very much for taking the time and for having us and for sharing your knowledge and sharing your message.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My
And-
pleasure.
Thank you.
And if you found this episode interesting, you can follow us at adventuringforknowledge.com. You can also follow us in all podcasting apps, including Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And we have a YouTube channel as well, LinkedIn, all the social media
Instagram,
out
all
there.
that. Yes.
But use it wisely. Don't get
Yes.
stuck in it. And you heard it here. Spread the love, everyone, and have a beautiful day. And always remember to disconnect and relax your mind.
It's important to get out, soak up the energy from nature, be one with nature, spend time with the ones you love, and in general, love.
And most importantly, never stop adventuring for knowledge.